Welcome to another episode of the Tour on Air podcast. Today, I am joined by what probably to lots of developers is quite the legendary founder, David Heinemeier Hansson. And your list, reads very long and, actually very interesting because it's not just tech. You are, of course, the creator of Ruby on Rails, also the co-founder of Basecamp and HEY. As part of you being a CTO of 37 Signals, but also you're a New York Times bestselling author, Le Mans class-winning racing driver, something we definitely have to touch upon. You're an antitrust advocate, an investor, and a family man. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
So David, let's start by kind of talking a little bit about your early days in Ruby on Rails. Tell us about why what you created with Ruby on Rails had so much resonance, and what are maybe some of the learnings of kind of finding that product market fit in the early stages that you think anybody can adapt to his or her own endeavors.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I mean, I picked up Ruby back in 2003 when this was a programming language that barely anyone outside of Japan were using, certainly not in a commercial setting. But it was something that had gotten picked up by a couple of influential programmers that I were following at the time. Martin Fowler and Dave Thomas in particular were using Ruby in some of their teachings when they were writing magazine articles, and they always seem to talk about Ruby in such warm tones that if they could choose whatever they wanted to use to build a new information system, they'd probably pick Ruby. But alas, they couldn't. Usually have to work with Java or something else. But here we are illustrating some principle of programming. I'm going to use Ruby because it looks like pseudocode. It looks like a programming language that you can read regardless of whether you know Ruby or not. And I really picked up in that in 2003 when I had the opportunity to pick whatever I wanted to build a new system. This was when we just started building Basecamp, the project management system that we've been working on ever since. And I wanted to try to see if I could build that in Ruby. So I built it in Ruby, and that meant building a whole lot of the scaffolding, the tooling, to be able to create a system like Basecamp, because Ruby at the time just didn't have a lot of web tools in it. It was a wonderful programming language, even back then. Absolutely something I fell head over heels in love with. But there weren't a lot of other people using it. So I had to do most things myself, which meant that as the single technical person working on Basecamp, for only 10 hours a week, we were building Basecamp as a side project, not something we raised a bunch of venture capital to pursue, not even something we went full-time chasing in the early days. We built it as a third client, essentially, bootstrapping it off a consulting company. And in that genesis, I found that I just needed extremely productive tools. You have 10 hours a week. You're one developer, one technical person. 10 hours evaporate really quickly if you don't have very sharp tools that allow you to work fast. So I built the toolkit that would enable me to build something like Basecamp in the time we had, which was just a very different environment from the style a lot of other toolkits were built in. I mentioned Java. That was something that was large at the time. I was heavily influenced by what was going on in the Java world, but at the same time, I also felt the whole thing was full of ivory towers. It was full of overwrought stuff. There were some great ideas, but they were wrapped in an absolutely, to my eyes, awful development experience. So I put all this together, this toolkit, through the development of Basecamp, and at the end of it realizing, you know what? I have a whole kit here. If I wanted to build Basecamp again now, oh man, it would be so much easier. Do you know what? I should share this. I got to use Ruby for free, open source language. I got to use MySQL for free, open source database. I got to use the Apache web server for free, open source. We ran on Linux, open source. Everything that we had, everything we'd built our entire business on was open source. So to me, it wasn't even really a question, should Ruby on Rails be open source or not? Of course, it should be open source. I also simply think that there was no other way. At the time, you had Sun Microsystems pushing Java, and you had Microsoft pushing their commercial system. Yeah, you had IBM pushing also Java, actually. I was not going to go in. You needed guerrilla tactics to be able to combat that. And that's how I launched Ruby on Rails, with guerrilla tactics. And the most important was probably treating it as a product, not just as a piece of technology. Today, it's totally normal that a new piece of open source launches with a slick website and a cool video and all the other things we associate with product development. That was totally not the norm at the time. In fact, if anything, people in the open source community kind of looked skeptically at that. Hey, what is this product thinking? What is this commercial thinking doing in the open source world? So I treated it as a product, pushed it out, created awareness, starting a guerrilla marketing campaign, picking an enemy in Java in particular, poking the eyes of sort of Java advocates, and doing just the kind of A/B comparisons that really showed up Ruby on Rails well. And lo and behold, it didn't take long before a bunch of people realized that this was something they could use too. And what, a few years later, you had Shopify starting in, I think, 2005 as well. Github, I think, started in 2007. A bunch of these, I forget when Airbnb got going, but a bunch of these major companies, Twitter started also 2007 or something like that on Ruby on Rails. So you got all these things that got kicked off from that little thing, from one person trying to solve their own problem, and treating the promotion of it like a guerrilla marketing campaign, something that had to be funded with no money, just good ideas and a willingness to be a little brash about it.
And the success really was outstanding. You mentioned already a few, household names, of course, being started on Ruby on Rails. I mean, I did read it became the most popular open source web application framework. Do you have any data points in terms of, percentage of the web or, users engaging with?
I mean, the wonderful thing about the web is that no one knows whether the website you're visiting is running on a toaster or on a large mainframe. This is the appeal of the web. But I do know that there's been some statistics showing more than 1 million web apps created with Ruby on Rails, which is just mind-blowing, and hundreds of thousands of developers who've used it. And then we've obviously, after time, ended up with some truly staggeringly large companies running on that. I mean, the likes of GitHub and Shopify and Twitch and Hulu and Zendesk and Airbnb and Square and Kickstarter and Coinbase and Cookpad. And there's just a whole universe of applications that got started off that, which is really satisfying, especially since my approach to this was simply, I want to give something back, particularly to Ruby. I found this amazing programming language that was like nothing else I'd ever touched before, or I'd actually say since. And I thought, you know what? I should do my part to evangelize this and spread it so more people can experience the joy of programming in the Ruby language. And now hundreds of thousands of programmers have gotten exposed to that, whether they're still working in Ruby or not. I am sure that for most people, it's left a mark.
Did it leave a mark for you financially? I mean, open source, I guess, people like Mans and WEC, who we had on the show from WordPress, he built Automatic, right? Kind of as a company that plugs into the open source and that allowed him to monetize his work with WordPress. How did that go for you?
I went amazing in the sense that no, this was not where I made my money, and I made a little bit of money along the way. I was involved with some of the books and some of the conferences and so on, but it was it was chump change compared to building a business on top of this and deliberately treating it like it was not a commercial endeavor, that I wasn't looking for an angle to turn this into my job. In fact, I really enjoyed the fact that it was not my job directly. Now, great overlap between those two things, but no, I made all my money building commercial software, building Basecamp, building HEY, building the other products we've built over the years. And I thought that that split was just so much better. I've seen so many people think they can eke out a living from open source and finding it very frustrating, finding it almost like resentful of an experience, because on the one hand, you want to give something away, and on the other hand, you want to eat. And those two things are in conflict with each other. And I think that that's why, unfortunately, we end up with a lot of fairly bitter open source contributors who think of themselves as, I just want to build open source all the time. And there are ways you can do that, particularly on large platforms like Ruby on Rails. We have a bunch of people in the community who essentially work full-time on Ruby on Rails, but they work at a company that needs Ruby on Rails and work full-time on it through that. The same thing with Linux, the same thing with many of these other big packages. But this idea that you can make a living directly from open source, I've not seen a lot of happy outcomes of that. And I've seen a lot of resentful programmers getting minted through that process, because inevitably you'll look at something like, people have asked me, hey, all these billion-dollar companies have been built on the back of something you just gave them? What do we mean you just gave them? Like, a company's worth tens of billions of dollars on the stock exchange, and all their technology runs to this. And I go like, man, that's amazing, wonderful. I'm so happy for them. And I get to say that because, like, I'm not struggling to make rent, right? I might very well have fallen into that resentful trap too if I hadn't focused my commercial endeavors in a direction that didn't need Ruby on Rails then to pay it off. And then I got the luxury of treating open source as something fully divorced from the market. I could treat it totally as a labor of love, an uncommercial realm, domain, somewhere to take time off from thinking like, how do I make money on this? To simply, how do we learn more? How do we collaborate more? How can I inspire others to follow our footsteps at Basecamp of building something real important without having to hire tons of people up front or raise a bunch of money or any of these other things, simply focusing on the mission of making the most productive toolkit for creating web applications where a single programmer can make amazing systems, just like I did, and just like I would want to do again if I had to start over. This is how I think about it. If the reset button is hit on my commercial endeavors at 37 Signals, Basecamp, hey, it all goes up in smoke. I got to start over tomorrow, and somehow I lose all my money, so I can't pay others, right? What kind of tools would I want in my basket if I was going to do it all again? How should it look? How should it feel? And this is something I constantly think about as we continue to develop Ruby on Rails, is that, like, I'm not building Ruby on Rails for me, the person working at a company with 70 plus employees. I'm building it for me, the single practitioner who has to start over from scratch. That's where I draw my energy, and that's where I'm really excited to see when people pick it up. Now, it's always satisfying when you see something like a GitHub or a Shopify, these huge companies. GitHub just celebrated $1 billion of ARR the other day, and you go like, wow. And obviously Shopify is still a listed company, also running billions of dollars through this. You see their stats on Black Friday, and you just go like, I can't even comprehend these numbers. They're just incredible. But you know what? As much as I respect and enjoy that, I actually enjoy a little more when I hear stories about new entrepreneurs who were able to build something they couldn't have perhaps done otherwise, or they wouldn't have done otherwise, or it went really well for them because they picked Ruby on Rails. That's the sort of juice that keeps me going with this after, what is it, 19 years, 20 years? It's going to be 20 years next year. Damn.
Wow. It's impressive. And I mean, I wonder now, you know, like in terms of if you were to start over again, like what are your thoughts on kind of blockchain and sort of tokens, you know, orchestrating the incentives, you know, of every participant, let's say, of an open source ecosystem. Do you think that is, important path for the open source community to take? The financial kind of implications of a token, but also, the implications, of course, in, guerrilla marketing and in kind of, having your first users kind of, get the incentive of, promoting your technology and generally blockchain's role in open source.
I think it's really interesting, and I'd love to see people experiment with that. Like, my particular situation is really grounded in this idea that my participation in open source, I want to define that beyond the market. I wrote a whole post about open source beyond the market and what motivates me to do open source. I do so much commercial work already, where we're thinking about pricing and market and this, that, and the other thing, that this is like a refuge from that. But that's not true for everyone. And perhaps some of those disgruntled open source developers who really do want to spend all their time on open source, they don't want to be part of a company, maybe sort of tokens of blockchain can be a way to help them along that. But I also certainly do want to caution anyone around this in the sense that, do you know what? If you want to make money in software, maybe you should just sell it. I mean, it's a business model that's worked pretty well for the past 40, 50 years. Now, again, doesn't work for everyone in all cases. And if blockchain and tokens can provide an alternative to some of the disgruntledness, I think that would be a nice outcome. And this is the thing too about open source. We call it open source, and then we think about it as it's one monolithic thing. It's not at all. You have things like Ruby on Rails that's been distributed on the MIT license, which is basically do whatever the hell you want license, just don't sue me. You don't have to give anything back. You can use it in commercial projects. You can build $1 billion business on top of it. And then you have other things distributed on the GPL. Hey, you have to give things back. If you make changes to it, you got to contribute that back. I could totally see like a third path here of like, hey, this is a development model built on tokens, and we have an economy around it, and this, that, and the other thing. But the other thing here is like, I'm a spectator at best of the whole Web3 world. I actually kind of I used to be not just a spectator, but like an angry opponent of it, I'd even say. And then I really changed my mind at the beginning of this year through some of the political events that happened in Canada. And I saw some of the consequences of having a whole economy decided by political ethics. And then I went like, whoa. I'm going to look at blockchain, Bitcoin, everything in a totally new light now. Now, I still look at it with greater fondness than I did before this year, but I also look at it with some sadness in the sense that many of the things that appeal to me, the decentralized nature of it, kind of does not seem to be always what's top of mind for people. I mean, the latest FTX implosion is a good example of that. Like, wasn't that the whole thing the thing was built around avoiding? Now I understand the usability of using exchanges and all these other things, but to me then, like, how is it different than just using shitty banks? I'm still struggling with a bunch of that.
I mean, your kind of business model around 37 signals and Basecamp and HEY, etc., is also, I guess, somewhat unique almost. I mean, it shouldn't be unique, but let's say the financing of the development in the tech landscape, right? I mean, you famously kind of built this in a very bootstrapped, sustainable manner, right? And trying to be profitable and growing sustainably at your own pace, not raising lots of VC money, although eventually Jeff Bezos's private investment firm did end up taking a stake.
Never investment into the company though. Okay. That was money off the table for Jason and I. We never put a dime of investment money into the operations of the company because we didn't need to. The company has been profitable since its founding in 99, 23 years of profitability and still going strong. But Still, yes.
Incredible. Yeah, tell us about that philosophy. Like, was that something that you, deliberately from the beginning, said this is how you want to grow the company, or were you at one point talking to VCs and you didn't feel a culture fit, and you're like, actually, we don't want to go through that whole, VC hyperscale, hyper growth, super fast exit, IPO type of path?
Yeah, Jason and I were both blessed with the experience of having worked through the dot-com boom and bust. In fact, both of us sort of entered the internet craze around the same time, got going with the internet in the mid to late 90s, just as things were building up, just as things were getting crazy, just as VCs were just throwing absolutely mad money after the dumbest ideas on the internet. And then we saw what happened in 2001 when all of it just went poof, and the hurt and devastation that left behind. And that really informed both of us in much the same way as people talk about having lived through the Great Depression. You'll think about the cost of butter or not wasting things for the rest of your life, having lived through something like that. Now, this wasn't quite as traumatic as that, but in terms of sort of company construction, how to build them, how to scale them, how to fund them, it was in some ways as instrumental in terms of our understanding of how we wanted to do it when we got a chance. And so both Jason and I went into this together once we started working on Basecamp and thinking, do you know what? Don't want that. Seeing where that goes. And also why so much of my opposition to this was, this is freaking software. I, a single individual working part-time, 10 hours a week, can build Basecamp. What do we need tens of millions of dollars for? What do we need hundreds of millions of dollars for? We can build and compete. This is the thing, right? It's not like we just get to build something, even though that's what people said in the early days. Like, oh, that's cute. You're running a lifestyle business. I'm like, you have no fucking idea what our finances are. And I would laugh in your face if you knew what we were pulling through this business, even as a small business. If you knew what our margins were, I don't think you'd be so coy about labeling us as a lifestyle business. On top of the fact that I actually embrace that insult as a point of pride. Yes, it is a lifestyle business. We're running our own business, and we also like to have a life. What the fuck kind of business are you running? Do you want to run a business without a life? I mean, clearly that is what happened and happens still to a lot of founders who raise a lot of money. They get indoctrinated in this idea that unless they're putting in 80 or 100 hours for 7, 8, 10 years, they're not ambitious enough. They're not going for the moonshot, and they're not worthy of the investment. So it becomes this internalized slave driver for a lot of entrepreneurs that, oh, I've raised all this money, I better put in it everything. And then they go through and they wake up and like, shit, what happened to my 20s? What happened to my 30s? Oh, I guess I built a business that by all odds hit the damn wall. And a lot of them will look back upon that with some degree of regret. And we designed our business.
Then it's off to the Peruvian jungle.
Yes, exactly.
For ayahuasca ceremonies.
Exactly. And we had seen enough of that during the dot-com boom and bust that we were like, do you know what? We're not going to build our company like that. We're going to build it in a different way. We're going to focus on the things we really enjoy to do. And we're just going to let it grow at its own pace because we're profitable from the get-go. Again, why were we profitable? Because we were just making millions and millions of dollars? No, because our expenses were tiny. We were 4 people paying ourselves modest salaries. And we even waited a year and change before we went full-time with Basecamp until it could pay all the bills. So I really got fired up about that, particularly as I saw more and more entrepreneurs get sucked into this. Good ideas, potentially great companies that could have been a wonderful 50-person company, $10 million a year company, maybe even $20 million a year company, get smashed into a wall as VCs just try to hit the gas to get to Unicornville, or would rather see it go off the cliff because the math of the venture capital is, do you know what? We just need 1 out of 10 to pay for the basket. but we do need every one out of those 10 shots to give it a go. They need to chase the unicorn thing. And if they can't get there, it's actually better kind of sort of for us if they just blow up. Then at least we get to recycle the ingredients. We can put the same entrepreneurs on another unicorn chase. And hey, those are good outs for us. For the individual entrepreneur, for the individual person starting a startup, if you even make it to a Series A run, which is hard enough in itself, do you want a 90% chance of hitting the wall, of getting wiped out, or at best doing a base hit where a liquidity preference is just sucking up all the value that was created on that if you get acquire hired or sold or whatever? That sounds shitty. I didn't want those odds. And part of that came from an understanding and realization that in terms of the material outcomes of running a startup, they hit really quick. The vast majority of them. The difference between having $0 in your bank account and having $1 million, that's like 95% of the fun. Now, there's also fun beyond that, but it's the last 5%. I would rather want a great shot at making that jump from 0 to 1 than a super long shot for making it jump from 0 to 1,000, let's say. So we went into it really dedicated to that, and yet still, the temptation was there, right? We started this thing, we launched it in 2004. And by 2005, end of 2005, we'd had 45 VCs, acquisition sniffers around the business. A lot of people wanting to have meetings or like, hey, what are you doing? Da, da, da. But we were inoculated from the start. We're like, no. But then still, you see these things. I remember, I think it was Flickr or something, got like a $20 million investment, or they get valued at $20 million, or something like tens of millions. And you just go like, do you know what? I can look at my bank account. There's not millions of dollars in that. It's a little tempting. And that's when we then by happenstance connected with Jeff Bezos. He was doing sort of these kinds of just hobby investments at the time, not on VC terms. And he reached out, his team reached out, and we went like, do you know what? Not interested. And he went like, no. Let's have a conversation. Like, it's fucking Jeff Bezos. What are you're going to not take that call? You're going to not take that. I mean, even then, right? 2005, you're like, yeah, this is really interesting. Even though it's on the totally other end of the spectrum of where we're going and how we're going, exactly actually because of that, this is interesting. Let's have a chat. And we have a chat, and we're like these arrogant young bucks just going like, I don't need your money. So let me give you a stupid number where you can buy some secondaries. And by the way, you want to buy this? Yeah, we won't sell you that. We'll sell you a quarter of what you're asking for at this stupid number. And I remember his team was like, Jeff, they're saying it's a stupid number because it's a stupid number. This is a stupid deal. And he was like, yeah, I don't care. I'm doing it. So we were sort of like, this is where you have to be careful when sometimes you throw out a stupid number. The other side might actually go like,
you told them explicitly that would be a stupid number for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was obvious that the whole thing, we were so arrogant about the whole process that at one point where we started talking numbers, we were like, due diligence, right? You got to do some due diligence when you're doing it. We're like, our due diligence is going to be one sheet of paper, and it's going to have 5 numbers on it. That's what you get. Do you want to do the thing or not? Because we didn't really want to do the thing, right?
You wanted to meet Jeff Bezos.
In part, right? Like, we were just curious. But then what happened was he took what seemed at the time like the stupid deal, which actually turned out to be a fucking great deal. He's made his money back, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 times over. I've lost count. And he still owns the stake. And we're still going. So he just keeps making the money. He keeps just getting his cut of the profit. So yeah. Obviously he was smarter than even us. We thought we were offering him a stupid deal, but he still saw something. And I mean, the bet turned out well for him. But part of the blessing here wasn't so much even the money per se, even though like obviously it was nice going from like the 0 to the digits on the bank account. Hey, feels good. I bought a yellow Lamborghini like a month after the check cleared, right? Like, hey, that's fun. You're not going to see a bunch of sad people riding in a Lamborghini for the first time. I had good fun. But more important than that, it gave us the confidence to go the distance. It gave us the confidence to just say, yeah, not interested, when all the other VCs would show up, when we would see the competition raise a bunch of money or adjacent businesses raise a bunch of money. We would just go like, you know what? Don't need it. We already got enough off the table that if this thing goes poof tomorrow, we're not going to look with regret and think like, ah, shit, we should have taken the VC thing. Maybe we could have scraped a few crumbs off the table from that. No, we could just go like, hey, we sold a bit of the business, and now a fair amount of the risk is off. And let's just, boom, let's go all the way. Full max, full our vision, full our decision-making, full our intent to run the business in a way no one would ever have given up permission to do. Complete independence. And here we are, what is that, 16 years later? And like, man, I'm really glad Jeff took our dumb deal.
Before we get to, the success of Basecamp in particular, and hey, just one more follow-up on, like, can you tell us a little bit more, like, how is it to have a meeting with Jeff Bezos? I mean, what can we learn from how he conducts meetings, how he I actually used to work at Amazon, and never met him, but his spirit, of course, was felt, and actually the cultural tenants at Amazon, they really felt very like very structurally guiding for every employee at the company. No presentation, no slides, and
yes,
famously you do a 6-pager, for
yes,
important meetings where you write down your thoughts and pros, and that gets you kind of to to think things through, and not kind of delegate thinking, just by calling a meeting without that type of preparation. Like, could you send something specific? That this is, 2004, 2005, Amazon was successful, but obviously nothing compared to what it is now. And could you sense, like, okay, wow, like you can feel how he conducted himself, how he conducted the meeting, the questions he asked, that that he's a goat?
Totally. No, it was apparent from the first time we met Jeff that, like, okay, here's a special individual who really sees things in a different way, and has a very clear sight on the tenets he's building his business on. And I remember some of these early conversations we had with him were really influential. One of the specifics was this idea of investing in things that don't change. This was one of those first values that he relayed to us, that we still talk about every year. Jason and I talk about investing in the things that don't change. And he was talking about it in the context of, like, is the customer ever going to wake up and go like, I wish my package arrived more slowly? No. So all the money we're investing in making sure that the packages arrive really quickly, and obviously in later years, you can see the full extension of that, building your own delivery network and so forth. That's going to be a moat. That money is not wasted. You can waste your money in all sorts of things, chasing all sorts of trends and so forth. But if you invest in the things that won't change, you're highly likely to continue to see dividends based on that investment until the end of time. That was something that totally influenced our thinking about how to approach product development. Things like performance and speed. Are our customers ever going to wake up and think, oh man, I wish Basecamp was a little slower? No. So when we invest in sort of fundamental technology, or how we build things in a way to make things faster, that's something that's going to pay dividends until the end of time. But then on the other hand, too, what I also found really interesting was that what Jeff gave us more than anything else was self-confidence. That was his greatest gift. We would show up to our yearly meeting, and we would talk about the business, and we would talk about how we were seeing things. And I remember Jeff just going like, oh man, that's great. That's really good. You guys are doing awesome. And like, at the one hand, you're like, aren't you going to tell us to do something different? Aren't you going to? And he's like, I don't know your business. I see it from the outside. I really like what I see. I remember he read Rework, and he was just like, man, this is a great book. This really sort of tells a lot about who you are. And you're like, you should just keep doing that. That was really fascinating to me. this experience of dealing with someone who was at that level, who had seen so many other things. We were this tiny little company compared to what he was even running at the time, even in 2005. I mean, Amazon was a huge company, right? I mean, it's 50 times bigger now, but even then it was enormous compared to our little shop, that he would look at that and go like, no, I like what you guys are doing. Keep going with that. That level of confidence really just inspired us and said like, all right, we're going to go for it. We're going to go for it our way. We're going to say the things we believe to be true. We're going to run the business in the way we think it should be run. We're not going to worry so much about what other people might think. We have Jeff Bezos telling us we're going in the right direction.
And in terms of work culture, and you've written a book, Rework, and there's a book, Remote. In terms of work culture, like it seems like you took a deliberately different path to maybe also what Jeff Bezos's kind of work, culture, at least from what we hear, is like. I mean, he talks about work-life harmony rather than work-life balance. Because he says like whatever whatever gets you into harmony, if you want to come home and be excited about work and continue, or talk to your significant other about work because it gets you fired up, that's okay. Like, did you have conversations with him about it? And can you share also some of the things in the book that kind of got most resonance among readers, and also in your experience in your company?
Yeah, so first I'd say where we saw completely eye to eye was the first thing you mentioned, this idea that writing is a way of thinking, and you should think before you meet. So this idea, I love this principle that Jeff instituted at Amazon, where like, no, we're not doing slides, we're not showing up cold, we're not wasting each other's fucking time in a meeting until someone has thought it through and written it down and seen the holes in their own damn arguments before they present them to others. So this was something like we saw totally eye to eye on. Also, his whole day one principle is something that we've returned to time and time again. Because when you've run as long as we have, which is for more than 20 years, it's very easy to get to day 2 or day 10 or year 5, right? When you just think like, things are the way they are, and that's just like, we can't, no. Day one, we can change everything right now. If we have better insights as to how the business should be run, we can change things. Mostly that has turned out to be relatively easy, good things. Sometimes it's turned out to be relatively hard things that still were good. But those were 2 examples of things where we saw really eye to eye. Where we perhaps didn't was on how to grow the business, right? Like Amazon was infamously, desperately unprofitable for an eternity. I think almost 2 decades
20 years,
or something like
20
years,
20,
right?
I think 20 years, not a single profitable.
Right. And that was on Jeff's sort of belief, like, hey, your margin is my opportunity. We're going to take all the profits, we're going to reinvest them, we're going to do all those things. That we were on the complete opposite ends of that spectrum, right? Like we were building things in a highly conservative, sustainable way where we spend way less money than what we had coming in. We never ran the risk of like, oh, if the market doesn't like us, we're going to be in trouble, right? So that was something where we really diverged, and this is something we focused on in all the books we've written. This bootstrap approach as an alternative. Amazon is perhaps the greatest, or one of the greatest, at least, examples of I was going to say the VC way, but that's not even true, because by modern standards, Amazon did not raise very much venture capital at all. I forget what the exact number is, but it's a tiny number compared to what's being raised now. But obviously, it did go public. It did use shareholder money for 2 decades to sort of build out where it got to. And we weren't going to do any of that. So we've been preaching sort of a counter melody to the venture capital, to building businesses in this conquest mode. This was also something we didn't really have. And partly because we were operating in a different business. Jeff obviously saw this as like, hey, here's a market share pie. We're going to grow the market share, or we're going to grow the pie, but we're also going to take the lion's share of the pie. And we were like, I don't need that. In fact, we deliberately have kept the company tiny by any reasonable comparison, compared to Amazon, obviously, but also compared to our competitors. We're just a small company. For the longest time, we were like 40, 50 people. Today, we're slightly larger because now we also run HEY, hey.com, our email service. So now we're like 72 going on 80 or something. Huge for us. But staying in that ethos, in that mindset of, you know what, we are a small to small medium size business. That's what we know. That's what we're going to share our experiences from, because so much of what's written otherwise in the business press is an attempt to extract lessons from the giants, right? Like Good to Great and all these other things, like, oh, how do you build the biggest thing ever? And what did they learn? You're like, whatever you learn building the biggest company in the world, you know what? Most of those lessons are not going to apply if you're 5 people. In fact, not only are they not going to apply, they're going to apply negatively. If you do the same shit that Facebook does, or even Amazon does, on a lot of particulars as a small company, you're going to die. And that comes in all regards, how you run your business, but also the kind of technology that you pick, right? If you build your whole company in such a way that it requires an army of specialists, because, oh, you need the React expert, and then you need the native expert, and then you need the this and the that and the that, and before you even say hello world in your app, you have 20 people. You're like, yeah, no, that's not a good path for you. Microservices, another great example, or service-oriented architectures, total sense for Amazon. How otherwise are you going to make tens of thousands of people collaborate? Total nonsense for a team of 5. Other total nonsense. So a lot of that in rework is speaking to the self-confidence of a small company, that small is not a stepping stone. You don't have to grow. In fact, there's so many things you can do when you're a tiny company that most large companies wish they could do. They wish they could be so agile. They wish they could have such a quick turnaround time on decisions and feedback and so forth. And they have to work incredibly hard to even begin to approach it in a way that comes completely natural to a small company. This is our tribe. The Fortune 5 million, as we speak about, that's who we address. It's who we sell to. It's what we know something about. It's who we write to. It's who we share experiences with, and teaching them to be even more efficient, even more comfortable in their own skin. That's what gets me fired up. And yeah, even to this day, I mean, Jason actually just wrote this awesome new thing we just put on Basecamp.com. It's at basecamp.com/small. And it talks about this exact moment of not feeling inferior, that small is not the stepping stone, contrasting our small business to now the many competitors we have in the business, right? For example, lots of people will now cross-shop Basecamp with like Asana or Monday.com or Smartsheet or ClickUp or any of these things. And we go like, do you know what? These companies can't even run their own business. All these companies are losing hundreds of millions of dollars every year. And they're going to tell you how to run your business? Hey, do you know what? If nothing else, 23 years and going, profitable every year. I think we have perhaps a little more relevant things to tell you if you are a company of similar-ish size.
Small is beautiful. Have you read the book, Schumacher?
I haven't actually. I've heard the title a million times. I really should read it.
Yeah. Have a look into it. Which we have like 10, 15 minutes more. I don't know if you have a hard stop. A few more questions. I mean, one, sort of on, how you as a team, I guess, with these, probably you don't have resource constraints per se. I mean, you're, profitable, successful business, but you don't raise that, exorbitant amount of money to then kind of fulfill all of your product and feature dreams. Like, how do you decide, is this not sometimes difficult, that you have all these ideas of things that you would want to maybe do? So is it good to have that constraint, and how do you prioritize?
Yes, this is a topic I love. One of the all-time greatest principles that we seek to live by is that constraints are liberating. Constraints are no bad things. In fact, we have worked very hard to retain the constraints in which we were forged. We started, as I said, a single technical person, a couple of designers, built the whole business with 4 people to get going. Now we're about 70 people. We don't have the same constraints, but we still enforce them. We don't have to have the same constraints, but we use our own software development methodology. It's called ShapeUp. It's also at basecamp.com/ShapeUp. And primary amongst all the things that methodology speaks about, it is the constraints. So we, for example, we work in 6-week cycles. Anything that we work on, I shouldn't say anything, 95% of everything we work on can be done by a team of 2 people, 1 designer, 1 programmer, working for a maximum of 6 weeks. Those are the constraints that we not just accept, but embrace with gusto, because it is so easy as soon as you have more money and more time to build more and more and bigger. This was one of the things we kept hearing in the early days. Aren't you afraid that Microsoft is just going to sweep in and they're going to throw 400 people at the Basecamp size problem, and then they're just going to wipe you out because they can just build so much more? And we were always like, no, because do you know what? If you throw 400 people at the project management problem, you're going to get the kind of software that takes 400 people to build. That is not the same software we're building. It is a completely different category. We do not compete head on. This is something we've seen with a lot of the more modern competitors too. Someone was just mentioning ClickUp the other day. We're like on Surface, they were like, they're really attracted to it. Like it has all these things and they're shipping all these major features all the time because they have a lot of resources. I think they raised $400 million or something. And then they were like, but then we started using it and it was just a fucking basket of shit, right? Like the features weren't integrated. They weren't well thought through. There was just too much stuff. Our greatest benefit and pitch for Basecamp is that, you know what? It can't get too much stuff because we're not a big company. We can't build it. We simply can't build too much stuff. And a lot of that comes from embracing these constraints, being happy about these constraints, not belabeling them, not going, boo-hoo, why don't we have $400 million? Boo-hoo, why don't we have 400 people working on something, going like, do you know what? No, we're going to build the damn best Kanban board, which is one of the new features we launched in Basecamp. That takes 2 people. That's it, 2 people. That requires savage cuts to your ambition, to how it's going to work. But that's the thing. Your ambition and your ability to implement is a power law. The first 5% of the solution carries almost all the juice. As you build more and more, not only does it carry less and less juice, quite quickly, it actually turns negative. You end up writing worse software, more convoluted, more configuration, more concerns, more user testing, more inputs from all these different angles. We're like, yeah, that's not how we do it. It was the same thing with hey.com. So we're like, all right, we built Basecamp. We've run it for a lot of years. Wonderful. Let's take on the biggest fucking challenge in the world. Let's take on Gmail head on. Gmail has a monopoly essentially on email. I think they're responsible for something like 80% of all email in the US goes through Gmail. But we were like, Gmail sucks. Gmail was a wonderful introduction to email, a revolution for email, just the whole thing that there's no storage anymore. In 2004, very quickly thereafter, they sealed up the market, and then they had no serious competition, no reason to evolve, no reason to get materially better. So Gmail is still stuck in the best thinking of 16 years ago. So we went like, do you know what? We're gonna tackle that head on. How big is Gmail? Like, what do you think the code base is? Millions of lines of code, probably, right? We're not doing that. Jason and I are going to sit down and we're going to build V1 of hey.com that's going to be our absolute favorite email experience. That means it doesn't have a bunch of shit, because there's all sorts of features and concerns and whatever, just not relevant. But the stuff that we do build, oh man, that's going to be unique. That is not going to be anything like the experience you get out of a Gmail. And we could do that because of these constraints. If we had had a bunch of investors breathing down our neck going like, do you know what, as soon as you launch this, it's going to go on this trajectory. You better do a lot of user interviews. What do people want? We were just like, yeah, I'm not La, 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 la. I'm not even going to listen. We're just going to build what we fucking want. A super sharp vision of the best damn email experience in existence based on Jason and I using email for damn near, 30 years. Very opinionated software arrives out of that process. Very different software arises out of that software. And in the case of Hey, for example, we're going up against Gmail, right? Not only are we going up against this entrenched monopolist who basically sealed up the market, we're going up against free. People get Gmail for free. And we're going like, no. Do you know what? You should pay $100 a year for email. And those are the kind of challenges that I just find invigorating. Also because, of course, when we say we go up against a Gmail, we're not, I mean, that's not really true. We're not like, oh man, are we going to get 2 billion users in a few years? No, we're not. We're not going to get anything like it. We're charging for email. We don't need 2 billion users. We're not trying to monetize them by pillaging their inbox and looking at their receipts and all the other nasty stuff that Gmail does to your email. We're just going to sell you a product. It's a very simple transaction. Hey, you like this email thing we made? Give us $100 a year. Then it's yours. That's it. There's no other thing here. And you can run your company in such a extreme is perhaps the wrong word. It looks extreme, perhaps sometimes from the outside, extreme way when you have this full independence, when you've had the full confidence, because we had Jeff back in 2006 give us a large check that took the risk and the stress off the table. And we're just going to go pedal to the metal on the best ideas we possibly have. And there's going to come some great software out of that some people are going to go like, yeah, that's not for me at all. And some people are going to go like, holy shit, this is the best thing ever. We get this with Hey all the time. Some people are like, they don't quite jive with, for example, the screener we have, where nothing ends up in your inbox before you've said, I want to hear from this person. This is one of those fundamental problems of email. Anyone who has your email address can reach your attention, or in the even more perverse case, they can make your pocket buzz. Isn't that just, if you told someone from the 80s that like, hey, anyone who has your email address can make your pocket buzz from a notification, that just sounds like a torture experiment, like it sounds insane. Anyway, we reset those expectations. For some people, they go like, no, I'm not going to. Gmail, all right, that's all there's something to it. But for the people who get it, they go like, there's nothing like this. So that's kind of what we think about constraints. Constraints are fucking amazing.
You certainly sold it to me. I can't wait to try that, because I am also I love email, to be honest. I still haven't gotten tired of email generally. Like I love working with
email's the best.
I love adhering to this, this could have been an email instead of a meeting.
Yes.
Type of scenario. So and I have a very specific setup where I actually, and also with my work with Tor, we looked at it. Like when we have a big event, organized, like I would get 25,000 emails per quarter. And then I'm also, very much this kind of zero inbox, and I literally read all of them, which is, something that I should get better at. And I like what you're proposing there. But I have my inbox basically, I use a Gmail Labs type of integration where I have the inbox structured in a way that, I can label according to the getting things done methodology. So,
right.
What is, a sub to do, what is to do with, less urgency, what is things that are being scheduled, what are things that are being delegated to other team members, and what are, things and emails that I'm waiting for a reply to. And then I, kind of have multiple inboxes set up for all of these different labels. Anyway.
Oh, you're going to love Hey, because the main thing we really did with Hey was we took all these hacks that everyone were layering on top of something like a Gmail, all these workflows that Gmail barely made possible, but people stitched it together with duct tape and whatever, and we set it into, we're actually going to build a system around that. Like one of my favorite things is a feature in Hey that's called reply later. So I get a ton of email, right? And I'll post something on my Hey World blog, and I'll get like 100 emails of people responding to that. And I want to get back to everyone. But you know what? Right now, as soon as that email ticks into my inbox, that's not the time where I should be doing that. And I don't want it sitting in my inbox, partially stealing, robbing my attention as my eyes continue to glaze over the same thing I've been looking at a ton of times. So we have this reply later feature. You put it in this box, and then when you look, all right, I actually only do this like every 2 to 3 weeks. I go into this box and I'll have hundreds of emails. And I have an interface that's set up just for that, just for replying quickly. Like it's just email after email after email with type box. And I can knock out 200 replies in maybe 30 minutes.
Wow.
Because I just go like, and I'm on a roll, right? I'm on a roll because I'm replying to all these people. So it also doesn't get into this sort of like, I'll just keep deferring it and deferring it and deferring it until my inbox. The joke with Gmail is like the counter for some people says like 10,342
Oh my God,
emails,
I couldn't. Right? That makes me nervous. Yeah.
So really solving that and taking some use cases where like some people, a healthier way, actually, I would say, of processing email is to do it in bulk. Yep. Don't this was I was a inbox zero fanatic when I was running on Gmail, and I realized that was really sapping my attention. I would constantly pay attention to the inbox throughout the day, and it would constantly rob my attention. And I would, because I was so focused on inbox zero, I deal with things in the moment that weren't important.
Yeah.
And what you realize is if you bundle these things together, you can do the 200 emails in a concerted 30 minutes, and it steals nothing of your time for the rest of it.
I think the Eisenhower matrix for me is my absolute favorite productivity kind of, theory or diagram, where you have to make that distinction between what is important and what is urgent, and what is important and urgent. And
yes,
to learn that also, I think, is a founder journey or any professional's journey, right? To be able to prioritize. But then, let's rush maybe through 2-3 questions. So there's one question we ask everybody on the show, and I'm very excited to ask you that, since I know, you think about these things a lot. And that's around kind of pivoting. And, we have these examples of companies, they, Twitter, they start with audio, then they become Twitter, successful, pivot. And then we have these other companies that, just incrementally kind of, year over year, try to work on that one problem and kind of have an iterative approach to their development and product development, and often then get successful, and will tell you like, no, you gotta keep steady and stay the course. And how do you think about that? Like, is there a way for founders, or have you in the past found a good process to think about this, like, should I pivot or should I continue? A question that we all encounter in our founder journeys.
It's a great example, because actually before we built Basecamp, Jason and I built something else together, a book management software called Single File. And like it did okay for its time, but it clearly wasn't gonna take off. Let's just put it like that, right? And then we kind of just put it aside. Like for me and how we build products, like nothing we've built except for HEY's launch, but nothing else that we built has taken off like Basecamp has. We've had a lot of products over the years, and many of them were multi-million-dollar product lines, if you will. But we've also had some duds. We did an email not newsletter thing, like discussion forum thing at one point that we quickly canceled, because you just see in the beginning, is this going anywhere? I don't have the patience to wait around years and years for traction. I just don't. So I don't think if it's not working, I am inclined to back off. But the key distinction here is, what's the definition of working? I am sure that by today's VC metrics, we should have canceled. We should have pivoted out of Basecamp. It grew way too slowly. Way too slowly in terms of what the expectations are if you'd raised a bunch of money to pursue this problem. I think that's the real problem. If you set yourself up to basically needing the size of a success at the pace that VC capital requires you to do, there's all sorts of fantastic ideas that seem dumb, that seems like something you should pivot out of. And what a tragedy if we had pivoted away from Basecamp, right? Like, over 20 years, we've helped millions and millions of people, and we could pivot it away because by the end of year one, it couldn't even pay the salaries of 4 people, right? We didn't have this. Actually, I don't know what the exact was, but there's something like you got to have the 40 over 40 or all these VC rules of thumb that we did not, I think, subscribe to. Or you look at something like MailChimp, right? That obviously took quite a long time to get going, started as a side project as well, ended up being worth whatever, $20 billion. So if you have a realistic vision of like working, I like sticking with it. But also if it's a flat line, yeah, okay, I'm going to bail.
Two more quick questions. One, you were mentioning you guys were arrogant when you were pitching Jeff Bezos, and I just followed a conversation around that online between some VCs who would make the case that kind of founders need to be arrogant, or at least historically have often been arrogant. Can you be successful while staying very humble?
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, there's room for all sorts of different personality types here. This was basically just something that fell to us. And I think too, I mean, plenty of people have sort of a visceral reaction to arrogance and really dislike it. I think it's always fascinating because to me, it's like this person, there's a good chance. Well, I don't know if there's a good chance. There is a chance this person knows essentially non-public information, right? That's why they're arrogant. They think they know something different. And actually, do you know what? If you got to take a big swing and believe in your own business, some degree of self-confidence is a benefit, right? Like if you don't even believe in your full idea, you just go like, I don't know if this is going to work or whatever. That seems like an uphill battle to drag on for me. And then the second thing in terms of funding, I think the arrogance comes with whether you need the money or not. We were allowed to be arrogant in the sense that like we had the leverage. We could just have said no, right? If you're coming in like, hey, please, can I have some money? And you don't have like 1,000 options to pick between, like maybe arrogance isn't quite the right tone to strike.
Lastly, just on your work culture, are you still remote? And then I'm also intrigued just to, and maybe some learnings around that, but I'm also intrigued to hear like, this co-founder relationship over decades, right? I mean, how can you make that work? And I'm sure you've seen many cases, maybe also in portfolio companies you invest in, where that hasn't worked out. What would you say is like the one thing, people need to work on to make it work long term?
So we've been remote for over 20 years. Since the founding of the company, we wrote a book about this in 2013 called Remote Office Not Required. So we are so steeped in it, it's almost difficult to extract ourselves from it. But I have observed a lot of organizations that weren't remote and then had to go remote. And for me, the number one thing is to make the transition from a real-time collaboration company to an asynchronous time collaboration company. Going from meetings is the first tool we reach for when we have to make decisions or update each other, to a meetings last process, where meetings is what we do when we've tried everything else. And writing is at the center of how we collaborate. That to me is the grand key. Because if you communicate through writing with your deliberation, with your pitches, with your status updates and so on, you allow flexibilities where the gears don't have to grind. You don't have to line up calendars to fit. In fact, we don't even have shared calendars at 37 Signals. We've never had shared calendars. I can't tell when Jason is free. I have to manually like, hey, if we got to meet, like when can we? And it's a hassle on purpose, because it forces us to reach for other tools first. It forces us to reach for writing first. And that is a much better way to build a long-term culture as a remote company, because now there's simply a body of work, a body of decisions that someone new coming into can get up to speed on very quickly or whenever it's relevant. And I think
would you also say, David, sorry, I have to, this is just such a question I'm so passionate about, but would you say, like, is it important that the company has this kind of social context, or would you say, actually, you know what, it's a job, like, we have, sports and clubs and church and family, where we can derive our social meaning from, and work, doesn't have to be that to some extent. And that maybe also, millennials, look for it more because they have less of these other, no families till later in life, less church attendance, less generally clubs attendance.
Yeah, huge. That is a great point. And it is a challenge with remote. And we saw it particularly under the pandemic, where people who did not have sort of a base already, they were just sitting by them home and basically in home isolation for months on end. It was not pretty. I mean, there are employees everywhere at all sorts of companies who literally went crazy. It's not for no reason that isolation is on the list of the United Nations forms of torture, right? We are social animals. You need social connections. And even within a remote company like ours, we need that too. We do a full company meetup twice a year. We just did one in Amsterdam, flew everyone in from all over the world, spent an entire week together where the number one purpose is to fill up on the social batteries. Companies that try to skimp on that, if they want to be fully remote, man, it's difficult. What I've realized is you don't need to see each other every day. Now, some people do, but there are other ways you can fulfill that desire, co-working spaces, or as you say, having a richer life. And this is one of the things where I thought in the US in particular, things went astray. There was such a focus that work is life, and all these campuses that pampered their employees to the point that, why should I ever leave? I can do my laundry, I can eat dinner, I can work out, there's a doctor, I could just stay here 24/7. Yeah, of course, you then have a complete fusion between your home identity and your work identity, which I think we're still paying for in all sorts of regards. It's absolutely not a healthy way of working, in my opinion. It's far better that you treat work as a really important thing of your identity and your time, because it's where you spend 8 hours, but also just one. It's one pillar. This is something that Jason and I embraced from the beginning. We worked 40 hours or less from day one. In fact, as we talked about, not even from day one. From day one, I worked 10 hours a week. But once we got going full time, it was 40 hours of work or less. And then we had hobbies. And then we took vacation. This idea that like, I am my work, I think is a deeply toxic way of living. All that being said, it is still true that if you're early in your career, and particularly if you're an extroverted person, the office might be better for you. It's not like everyone has to go remote. Everyone has to stay in the office. Remote has worked out very well for us, but I full respect, and I've invested in a bunch of Danish companies where it's far more common that you have an office and lots of people go to it and so forth. So, yeah.
Now we just forgot the one word on founder. How do you keep a 20-year founder relationship? Is it trust? Is it communication? Is it?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a whole book about that. It's really helped that Jason and I see very eye to eye on all the fundamentals of business. If we were like, no, we should take VCs to grow faster, and the other person was like, no, we should bootstrap, it's going to crack. I think what also really worked for us was we had our own domains of expertise. Jason on the design side, me on the technical side, on the programming side. And then we had our overlaps. We both love writing. We both love marketing and sort of the runnings of the business. So we had sort of shared parts on the Venn diagram. And then we had our own parts on the Venn diagram that we could go off to do. And then we also just had a fundamental deep respect for our personal independence. Hey, you go chase the things you want to do. I go chase the things I want to do. We meet from time to time. We don't sit on each other's lap. I mean, right now, in fact, Jason is on the West Coast and I'm here in Europe. We're 9 time zones apart. Most days we have like 1 hour of overlap, and we still only use it a couple of times a week.
Mm-hmm. David, thank you so much. I mean, I could have gone on and on talking about metrics and so forth and dive even deeper. Maybe we'll see you in Berlin sometime. Thanks so much for sharing this, and everybody go check out Basecamp, and I certainly would give HEY a try.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on. And if anyone cares about the books or anything else where I write, dhh.dk, you can find links to everything.